My name is Anne Downton, and I'm the convener for the MAV20 virtual conference, and a particularly warm welcome to all of you who are attending for the first time today. I will be your host, and my role is to introduce the presenters and sessions and provide any announcements. Now, if you have any technical issues, please check your confirmation email for troubleshooting and who to contact for support. So let's begin. This is room 1, and our keynote presenter for this room is Anne Gervasoni. Anne is an Associate Professor of Numeracy at the Faculty of Education, Monash University in Melbourne. She has worked in educational research, teacher education, professional learning, and as a primary teacher for 38 years. She was a member of the research team for the Australian Early Numeracy Research Project in Victoria and research director for the Bridging the Numeracy Gap project in Western Australia and Victoria from 2009 and 2010. Anne's research and scholarship focuses on mathematics education in early childhood and primary education, mathematics intervention approaches for students who are experiencing difficulty, and family-based and community approaches for supporting the learning of those most vulnerable in our community. Now, just before we cross to Anne, a short message from our sponsor, Maths Pathways.
The vision that students should always be quiet and listen as the teacher holds forth is one of the great myths of education. Rich tasks provide us one of our most effective tools to transform students into mathematicians.
I don't think of it as being maths, I just think of it as a fun activity, but they are incorporating everything they know about maths at the same time.
Trying to bring that challenge and the question back into it.
Debating each other, engaging in problem solving, really trying to make sense of what's true.
That's where the learning takes place, in the conversations that you have.
And it's actually like a brain exercise.
What you know right now has allowed you to predict the future.
You know, you take the boundaries off it and then some kids just fly.
Rich learning is something everyone deserves, and a math classroom without them is incomplete.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Anne Gervasoni, and Downton. Glad to have you with us during this session as well as the moderator. And importantly, what we're going to be exploring in this particular keynote session is a 2020 vision for engaging all children and families in mathematical learning. And in beginning, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands, the many lands on which we meet today, and pay my respect to elders past, present and emerging, and also acknowledge any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people who are present with us today. So what's our context for this session today? Well, we're going to explore a vision for primary mathematics learning and teaching that places engagement and engaging children and their families at the centre. We'll consider strategies that create opportunities for maximising mathematics engagement for diverse learners, including mathematical investigations, ensuring sufficient challenge for all, and pedagogies that enable differentiation and opportunities for all children to thrive mathematically. Our focus is to really think about what emerges when we envisage mathematics engagement in primary schools through various lenses. And the lens that we'll be considering today are critical thinking, culture, creativity, collaboration, curiosity, and communication. And I wonder what you are thinking about each of those key words and these lenses. Yes. Those of you who recognised 4 of the 21st century skills, that's exactly right. So the critical thinking, collaboration, creativity and communication. But we also recognise that culture and also curiosity are incredibly important ideas when we come to think about engagement in mathematics, learning and teaching. So what are some of the strategies we'll use in this session to facilitate your engagement? So one important thing is always about being able to build connections with me, with others in the session, with the content. So connection building is incredibly important. Now, I could mention that I'm a Lion supporter, and that might help you to make some connections with me or not. Anne, I saw you smile then as a Hawthorn supporter. Some of you will be primary teachers, again, my background, and that will help you build connections. Some of you might be joining us from places like Hepburn Springs and Yandoit and Dalesford, where my father's people come from, or down around Warrnambool, Tower Hill, Crosley, where my mother's people come from. I also spent some time in Ballarat, nearly 20 years when I was working at ACU there, but now settled back in Melbourne and based at Monash University. So connection making, important. I'm hoping you might put into the chat where you're joining us from in Victoria or elsewhere today.
And could I just jump in and say that Alex has typed in the chat. She says, I love the culture and curiosity that are included here. Curiosity sparks learning, an essential ingredient to drive learning.
Yeah, thank you. Well said. And I'm hoping that you'll keep flowing those chats and responses and suggestions for each other throughout the session. So we're going to be using our imagination a bit in this particular context, especially me, who's imagining you all out there in Zoom and conference land. I can't see you and you can't see each other, but you can use the chat function to really build that connection and respond and pose questions. And Downton will keep us informed. I'm also encouraging you to have some paper or a device at hand to make jottings and capture ideas along the way. And towards the end, I'll also have some resources that I'll put into the chat that you might want to link to at the end of the session. So I want to talk about engagement quite a lot throughout this session and present here a conceptual model for mathematics engagement. Now, engagement really sits within the motivation field of research. And there's a very long and complex set of research surrounding this field of motivation and engagement. But when it comes down to it, and we're thinking about engagement in mathematics, then what's important to know is that there are facilitators of engagement, there are indicators of engagement in mathematics learning, and there are consequences of mathematics engagement. Now, the consequences are the learning, the outcomes, the academic success, completing VCE, moving on to other opportunities in life, etc. And to achieve that learning and that academic sense when we're considering education, then there is a direct link between the indicators of someone's engagement, and particularly their behavioural engagement, and the learning. So in simple words, if you're not engaged, no learning happens. No rocket science there. but it's nice to know it's backed by research and evidence. But the other important aspect is that there are facilitators of engagement. And as educators and leaders, we need to really think about what are the facilitators of mathematics engagement that lead to the actual engagement of our students in mathematics. And those facilitators and the actual indicators of engagement, this is malleable. You can change it. And what changes children's engagement are these facilitators. Now that involves aspects of the context. So that could be the setup of your room, who's in it, the relationships that you have with the people in that room, your sense of belonging, your connectedness. This is all related to the experiences of the context, the sorts of tasks and how connected or relevant the tasks feel to you. And then there's aspects of self, the values that you have, your affective feelings of the actual context that you're in, etc. Culture is very important here too, because it also provides that sense of belonging and connectedness. So let's think about the facilitators of engagement and how we can really develop those facilitators to increase children's engagement and look for those indicators, whether they're the behavioural, on-task, involved, persistence aspects, the emotional aspects like your interest, enjoyment of the mathematics, or the cognitive aspects, which is really the strategies and approaches that you bring to engaging in the task. So this conceptual model is something to refer back to throughout the session this morning. So when we think about culture, Alan Bishop has really a lifetime of research and interest in the field of ethnomathematics and describes 6 mathematical activities in which people from all cultures engage. And when we think about connectedness as a facilitator of engagement and context and experience of context and sense of belonging, this is very important for us to consider. Now, these 6 activities are counting, some sort of counting, locating, measuring, designing. Think about all the cultural-based weaving patterns, etc. Playing, and particularly playing games, and explaining the world around you. If you think about families belonging to your setting and their cultures, what do you know about the ways that they count, locate, measure, design, play, or explain? Is this represented in a school setting when you walk through the gate, or when you walk through the office door, or whether you walk into a classroom? Do you feel that you belong and that your culture is represented? Is there something you could do to further develop that sense of connectedness and belonging? And when we apply this to the model for engagement, you can see that very much it fits within that facilitator or facilitators of engagement box. So what can you do to really enhance that facilitation of engagement from a cultural perspective? And of course, this is very much about involving families in the learning and teaching of mathematics. So what I'd like to do next is to do some everyday mathematics and then consider our engagement. Now, I happen to know that Anne Downton, like myself, loves strawberries. And I'm wondering who in the audience also loves strawberries. Maybe you could put that into the chat. If my sister was there, she'd say she hates them. But I love them, and I've got them growing in my veggie garden at the moment. So at the moment, it's a race every morning to run out and see if we can find some strawberries that haven't been got by the birds, the possums, or the slugs the night before. So here's one that was rescued from the veggie patch. In fact, yesterday, took a photo of it, and it's still rescued and uneaten. And actually, here it is. So it's not a huge strawberry. Last night, after tennis, when we had our tennis supper, I actually ate the biggest strawberry that I've ever seen. It was, when I compare it, I'd say it was 10 times as large as this strawberry. So we're going to actually explore this strawberry a little, and then I'm going to ask you to think about the engagement. So I'm actually holding up the strawberry a little close to my face, just so you've got a better perception of its size. So it's not a very large strawberry. They don't tend to grow that large in my veggie patch. So what I'd like you to do is to predict its mass in grams and type your prediction into the chat. So I'm happy for you to go ahead and be typing your prediction into the chat right now. I do have some scales here so that I can measure. I better turn it on so we can check that. But I'm wanting you to check through the chat and get a sense of how's everyone going with their prediction. What's the range? Smallest, largest prediction? And do you get a sense of an average, that sort of central tendency of the data? Because that's what I'll be asking to look for. So how are we going, Anne? What are you noticing in the chat?
I'm noticing 8 seems to be quite common. The lowest is 5, right up to 12 grams.
Okay, so not a particularly wide range, so
No.
gives us a little bit of a sense of confidence.
Yeah,
but,
now 13. Michelle's gone 13 grams.
okay.
But 8 seems to be, perhaps, I'm just scrolling. Yeah, 8 seems to be the median.
All right, so you're really getting that sense of the central tendency of that data. So I'm hoping lots of people are doing that. And I'm wondering if anyone's prediction was close and also how we might test this. So I wonder how you'd test. Now, it's interesting that someone once suggested that the average response is always pretty close to the actual answer. So, Anne, you've having a good look at the chat, and so are others. What's your feel for the middle prediction? And, you know, in one sense, if we ordered them all from the lightest to the heaviest prediction, what would be your sense of the median?
Do you want me to respond or wait for the others?
Yeah, no, you respond and the others can put it into the chat too.
Yeah, I think it might be around 7 now.
Okay, so drum roll. I've got the scales sorted and the strawberry is in place, and I can now report that the mass of this strawberry is 11 grams.
Oh, wow.
And I'm wondering if anyone actually had that score. I know someone had 12.
Yeah, Lauren had 12.
No one had 11 though, did they?
No. A few 10s, but no one 11. No one 11, no.
So interesting to do that little bit of mathematics in an everyday sense. Now, you might have a strawberry garden out in a school at the moment, for example, but imagine what you could do with a whole punnet of strawberries and a mathematical investigation. And I'm going to come back to that a little bit later. But I'd like you to think about mathematics engagement now. So from the point of view of facilitators of engagement or indicators of engagement, what did you notice? What did you experience yourself? Could you type some comments into the chat there? Have a look through what people are responding. Did you notice anything about any ways that I aim to facilitate your mathematics engagement? And of course, we have some indicators. So there were some people that actually did put in predictions, and Anne did a very good job of responding and letting me know what was happening there. So, Anne, anything coming through?
Not yet. Might need a bit of wait time, Anne.
So what did you notice?
Oh, here we go.
About engagement?
Background information, personal story as a hook. Connection to other things that I've weighed in the kitchen, says Megan.
Yep, nice one, Megan.
You modelled curiosity, which sparked my curiosity, says Alex.
And I'll just pause there. So that sense of asking you to predict, does prompt that curiosity, because then you're waiting to see what's going to happen. And maybe we'll just take another one or two, Anne.
I used similar idea to measure heights of students. It was easy to connect with the challenge, experience with holding and eating strawberries. You helped us to get a sense of the size by holding it against your face, says Bernadette.
Yep. And I'll just add that I'm quite aware that not everyone loves strawberries. I can't understand why. But even that conversation I had about my sister, about Anne, even if you don't like strawberries, you might connect with someone else in your family that does. And all of this helps to build up your connection with the mathematics. Now that leads me to talk about a couple of research projects that I've been involved with, focused on really building connections and the involvement in families in young children's mathematics. And the first is known as Let's Count. And this is a program I developed with Bob Perry with the Smith family. And basically this was about helping parents and family members to help their children to notice the mathematics that's part of their everyday life, talk about it and explore it. It's as simple as that. Nothing else except notice the maths, talk about the maths, explore the maths. And you might think back to the strawberry opportunity. That's exactly the sorts of thing that you can do as a family. Now, just a little bit of background. You can see here's some information about the focus of Let's Count. It was very much exploring and building partnerships between early childhood educators, particularly prior to school, and their families. And there's literally been hundreds of early childhood educators who've been involved in the Let's Count professional learning over the last 5 years in Victoria and elsewhere in Australia. So it'd be interesting to find out if your local early childhood centres have been involved in this particular program. But it's had some really remarkable outcomes. Firstly, it's really assisted parents to recognise the moments during everyday life to explore mathematics with their children. Now, I've got a couple of quotes from some interviews that we did with parents who were involved in Let's Count. Might just have a read of this one. So this mum said, I'm much more aware of how she can learn from everyday things. An example of this was yesterday. My husband brought home a little thermometer. He works in refrigeration, and she wanted to know how it worked. And I was just trying to explain and I couldn't be bothered. And then I thought, oh, put it in the fridge. And then she put it in the fridge and we looked at the degrees and she wanted to put it in the freezer and look at the differences in temperature. Yeah, from that it kind of snowballed into looking at why there were different numbers, what's Fahrenheit, what's Celsius, all that kind of stuff. So I think it was good. At the start of the year, I wouldn't have bothered. I wouldn't have even thought about it. But it just occurred to me like this is a good moment for her to explore it. And I'm hoping that one of the blessings of COVID-19 across the year was that we have had more opportunities to really strongly engage with parents in mathematics learning and teaching so that they're able to actually understand better the approaches and pedagogies that we use in classrooms in schools. But importantly, mathematics learning was and always has been, and the learning began at the centre of a family. Here's another example, and this was an educator reporting that one little boy came in today and said, I really want to measure my bed. So we made a measuring tape for him. I said, you could use your hands. And he said, no, I want a measuring tape. So we made a measuring tape. The information came from his mother first, and then we discussed it with the child. The mother came in and said, oh, he really wants to measure his bed. And I went, okay, we can do that. We can work out a way to do that for you. So sometimes it depends on developing a rapport between the educator and the parent. So true, isn't it? And this last one, another mum saying, well, she comes out with things every day. Something that really surprised me, we were talking about my birthday and I'm turning 22. And she said, oh, Mummy, you're turning 22. Isn't that 2-2? As in like 2-2. And I was like, yes, that's a number. And then so how do we add? Like, what do you do to get that number? Like, you know, she was just trying to work out how to get to 22, like all the different scenarios on how to get to the number 22. Now, 3 examples of a prompt like notice the maths, talk about the maths, explore the maths in everyday contexts, wherever you are. When this is part of the conversation and life in families from time to time, then mathematics learning flourishes. And you might think about what your family's been doing over the past few days, what mathematics that this involved. Look around you right now, out the windows. Identify opportunities to notice and explore mathematics. What do you notice? What are those opportunities? And what we can do in building that knowledge with families is to invite them to do things like take a photo inside or outside or wherever you are, and particularly photos where you're noticing an opportunity to talk about some mathematics and explore them, talk about them. And these can provide a stimulus, but also some understanding of the opportunities for other families. They could be shared in newsletters. Couple of examples of questions you might ask or prompts that you might have, just as an example. Now, one being a program that was sponsored and developed by the Smith family, who aimed to break the cycle of poverty through education, all of the communities in which Let's Count has been first implemented and particularly researched for impact would be designated as disadvantaged. Now, there's a great deal of evidence to suggest that children from such communities will not do as well in mathematics as children from more advantaged communities. But our work with Let's Count suggests that this argument needs to be reconsidered, or at least nuanced. And what's some evidence for that, which I'll get to in a moment. But if we just think about also other facilitators of engagement in the home, the games that we have or play, maybe they're games from your childhood that you can play with your children to help build connections. Maybe they're cultural games, Pachisi from India, Chinese checkers, etc. Children's literature, got some examples. You might spot some around the room in the background. Music, songs, dancing. These are all great facilitators of mathematics, especially when you notice, talk about it, and explore. So a bit of that evidence that I was talking about before. So we had our Let's Count group of students across a couple of years, 2014 and 2015, across some various states in Australia. And we also had a comparison group, children in the same communities, but the year prior to Let's Count beginning, so that we could actually have this sense of comparison between the impact of Let's Count for children's learning and families and educators' partnerships and engagement in mathematics. Now, to actually measure the consequences of the engagement in formal mathematics learning, and I might add these were 4-year-old children the year prior to beginning school, and their families who were involved in Let's Count for this particular piece of research. We used the Maths Assessment Interview, or you might know it as the Maths Online Interview, as a measure of children's formal mathematics learning. And there's an example of a 4-year-old child assessed in October just prior to beginning school. And many of you will know a number of these tasks fairly well, and I've just got a couple of examples here. So this example is from the detour, and it involves the teddies pattern. If you know that particular task, the photo at the bottom of the screen might help you with that. And you'll see in green, I've got the data highlighted for the comparison group, and in yellow, the data highlighted for the Let's Count groups in 2013 and 2014. And what we're showing in the table are the percentage of children who were correct with their response. And we're also showing whether or not these were statistically significant when we compared the differences with the comparison group. Now, the first one, being able to name the patterns, no significant difference between the groups there. Pretty much all the children were able to name the colours of the teddies in the pattern. But where does the mathematics become interesting, of course, is in matching the pattern continuing the pattern, and explaining the repeating part of the pattern. And if you look at the data there for the comparison group and the Let's Count group, you can see quite a difference in the percentage of children who were correct with that mathematics. And these were all statistically significant. Another example of impact on learning when it comes to engaging with small numbers and sets of numbers is this task where we showed children the number 7 and asked them to make that collection. And we also asked them to take one of the teddies away, they were teddies, and to tell us how many were left. And we noted whether they could tell us that without recounting them. So in all cases, the difference between the comparison group and our Let's Count group of children were statistically significant. And it's something like 20% additional proportion of students were able to be successful with those tasks. So that makes a huge difference in children's learning and highlights the great capacity for children's learning in everyday contexts, because nothing else happened with these students or children other than their family members and educators were noticing the maths in everyday situations, talking about it and exploring it, as highlighted in the examples earlier. So the consequences of this engagement are very strongly demonstrated in the learning of the students. Now, we have another research project that we've been involved in, and this particular one's called Numeracy at Home, which was funded by the Australian Research Council. And I worked on this with colleagues Sevenaze Phillipson and Peter Sullivan. And with this particular project, we aim to firstly articulate the numeracy goals and family-based experiences that would be important for young children from birth to 8 years of age. We also aim to identify the knowledge, beliefs, expectations of families who actively support the numeracy learning of their children and those who do not. One of the things we found there was how aspirational all families are for their children's learning and futures. And we also designed some resources based on those key numeracy goals to support and encourage families and educators to enhance early mathematics learning, and particularly across that birth to 8 years of age lifespan. Now, from the first set of research, we identified 11 ways to mathematics learning at home, and you can see those represented here. We've couched them in terms that we hope are pretty understandable for family members. So I'll just let you have a bit of a run through that list of 11. What do you notice about it? You'll see there's some measurement, lots of comparison. There's location and position. There's time. There's exploring shapes and properties of shapes. And there's a number of number aspects and goals there. And one of the things we did was develop a website, and this includes the 11 ways to mathematics. There's some little video snippets, very short, for family members to watch that gives a brief explanation of each of those 11 ways to mathematics and the sorts of things they can do at home. And there's another short video snippet of families engaging in this aspect of mathematics as part of their everyday experiences, and also some tip sheets. I'll just quickly show you what this looks like for those that may not have seen or used this resource before. And I'll put the link into the chat at the end of the session. But just as an example, the third goal was around location, and this one's called Where Is It? And this episode is about exploring locations, and there's a brief explanation there for family members. They can watch the video and they can click on the tip sheet, which will open on a phone or a device. And it can also be downloaded as an A4 page. And just to give you a little close-up of those tip sheets, they follow a similar example or pro forma for each of the 11 ways to mathematics with that blurb at the top. There's a prompt there for family members to watch and listen while children play, with some targets of what they might look and notice. There's some discussion around comparisons. So can we find something or some things that are inside the cupboard or outside the house or above your head, just as an example? And every day, some prompts to look for and describe where things are positioned when you're preparing a meal or dressing for the day, etc. And the bottom part will have some prompts for talking and describing, a house hunt, and some prompts for I Spy. So the sorts of things that you can do in everyday life that help you to notice, talk about, and explore the mathematics. And we know that that type of facilitation of engagement and the actual engagement of the children in that mathematics has direct consequences for their learning of mathematics. There's also a useful article that's been published on The Conversation that is another resource that schools often use with family members to give them some ideas about ways that they can engage in this way with their families. And also some of the tip sheets are used and downloaded by schools to actually give parents some ideas that will support the learning of a particular topic that might be being explored in a classroom at any particular point in time. So this discussion thus far has really placed families at the centre of mathematics learning. We've talked about engagement, and there's also been that opportunity to highlight the importance of culture for that sense of belonging and connectedness to mathematics as a facilitator of engagement, which also goes to the sorts of tasks that we're using and whether or not children actually feel that these tasks are worthwhile, whether they've got a sense of agency in making some decisions about the tasks and the ways that they'll approach and engage with them. And I do want to talk a little bit now about the tasks that we use in school and the ways that we work to facilitate children's engagement in mathematics learning in classrooms, particularly in those first few years at school, but certainly beyond that also. And this really speaks to the question, what emerges when we envisage mathematics engagement in primary school through these lenses? And I want to particularly talk about the 21st century skills in this next section. Now, if we think about a grade 2 student this year in 2020, they will finish their education through to year 12 in 2030. So their adult life, their further learning, their work, their family life, their citizenship is going to be all about the 2030s and beyond. And as leaders and teachers of children's mathematics learning, we need to be preparing our children right now for the life that they're going to experience in the 2030s, 40s, 50s, and more. And when you stop and think about mathematics classrooms, I wonder how well they're actually envisaging this view of the future, or are they more backward looking in thinking about and approaching mathematics and how it might have been taught 100 years ago in a very different context? So something to be thinking about. So how prevalent are the 21st century skills in F2 mathematics classrooms today? Now, I'd like you to think about an early years mathematics classroom that you might be part of or visited or experienced recently. And could you rate the prevalence of each of these 21st century skills from 0 to 10? So 0 being you don't really see it at all, and 10 completely all over it. So you can just do this yourself. Just think about what your rating would be for critical thinking and problem solving in mathematics, creativity and innovation, communication, and collaboration. And certainly if you have any comments, reflections, reactions, I'd welcome hearing about those, and I'm sure everyone would enjoy the opportunity to see your ideas in the chat as well. And we'll see if Anne's got anything to add from that perspective in a minute or so. But as that's coming through, I'd like you also to think about or imagine looking through the window into an F2 mathematics classroom where 21st century skills abound. Score of 10 on every measure. And to imagine, what would you see? What would you hear? How would it feel? I'm hoping that you're playing the video in your head now to actually be imagining this particular classroom. Now, Anne, I'm hoping a few people will respond with some ideas. Is there anything coming through that you could share with us at the moment?
One thing that Alex has posted is the Connections Through Picture storybooks that she's actively been exploring, and for older students as well, to support these kind of connections through nature and different areas of maths.
Yeah, fabulous idea, Alex. Very important. Children's literature, incredible prompt, but also a great hook to lead into some mathematics learning and investigations.
She's gone on further to say, thinking curiosity, hearing conversations, ideas, feeling warm and fuzzy. Yeah. Earlier on in the chat, she also made connections to Fibonacci sequence as a really nice way to explore the maths in nature.
Yeah. And I'm kind of liking that warm and fuzzy response too. And that certainly speaks to some engagement in your experience of a context, but also that emotional engagement that is an indicator of the way that you or children might engage in mathematics. That leads forward that pathway to learning. And knowing that we can influence that is incredibly powerful as an educator and a leader. So you're thinking about that 21st century classroom, and I'm coming back to our strawberry now. Can see Anne's at least getting quite hungry. But in honour of my sister Claire, who doesn't like strawberries, here's a task or a challenging task that we might be able to explore in an early years mathematics classroom. So Claire worked out that the total mass of 3 strawberries was 50 grams. What might be the mass of each strawberry? So of course, this particular task is all about playing some more with the strawberry idea that we'd engaged with a little bit earlier. And there's some opportunities to really think about the mass and the actual mass of strawberries and to imagine what that might be for smaller and larger strawberries. But it's also about being able to calculate and to be sure that the 3 strawberries are going to have a total mass of 50 grams. And there's a great opportunity to explore the strategies and explanations for how you can come to a range of solutions for this task. So there's some really important mathematics in focus for a task like this in a classroom to explore the mathematics. Now, whenever we use an open or a challenging task, for example, then there are some important hints that we need to make really clear and explicit to children. And it can take teachers and children some time to get their head around this approach to a mathematics learning opportunity or lesson. So some hints that are always important is that the idea is to work out some different solutions and to record these, represent them in some sort of way, so you can keep track but also talk about them later. That you need to challenge yourself with some creative thinking, try some new thinking, and talk through your ideas with others. So these 4 things will be important for the way that you'll engage with this task. Now, as a teacher, one of the things that we need to do in preparation for using a task like this is to anticipate the solutions that children will come up with. And that range of solutions, so those who might struggle, what sort of solutions do you anticipate they will create? Will there be any misconceptions that might be apparent that you'll need to talk through eventually down the track after we explore? And what about someone who's all over this really quickly? How will you extend? What do you think they'll do? What sort of strategies might they use? And how would you extend the thinking and learning for them? Because that role of differentiation is so important in our mathematics classrooms. Now, I'm hoping a few of you might have started to ponder some solutions for that particular task, the 3 strawberries and the total mass of 50 grams. So I'd invite you to put a few solutions into the chat. But once teachers have anticipated the range of solutions, then they're in a position to design an enabling prompt and an extending prompt, or several of these, so that the learning can be appropriately differentiated, and so that students can go and select the task that's going to work best for their learning right now. So it could be that someone chooses to look at this enabling prompt and explore this one. Claire worked out that the total mass of 2 strawberries was 50 grams. So you can see what's happened here. The complexity of the 3 strawberries has been reduced to 2, just makes some of that thinking a little less complex for students to get their head into the thinking and the calculations. May well be too that you need to use some other ways to support children to represent the total of 50. It could be bead strings. It probably would be better in this case to have some mass pieces that you could explore and to shuffle around to help you to design your set of solutions for this task. And it could be an enabling prompt like this one. So Claire worked out that the total mass of strawberries was 50 grams, but 1 strawberry was double the mass of one other. What might be the mass of each strawberry? So thinking this through as the teacher to really develop the engagement, the hook, but also the differentiation is really important when it comes to engagement, but also the 21st century skills. So let's think about how we're enhancing the critical thinking, the creativity, the collaboration and the communication. Now we've prompted for the creativity. We prompted for some talking it through, which leads to the communication and collaboration. And we hope there's been some critical thinking occurring, but we want to actually extend that now. So we might do things like prompt the children to look through their solutions and to work out which is their favourite and why. Bit of decision making there, some bit of self-determination. And then the prompt to talk about some of your solutions with your group. So you've already front loaded that by helping them to work out which is their favourite and why. And then talk about how you can be sure that the total is 50 grams in each time. So this is a prompt for reasoning and for talking about solutions and checking, working collaboratively. Which solutions involve some creative thinking, and the children can talk that through. I love listening to 6-year-olds talking about how creative their thinking was and why. And also which solutions involve some new thinking for them, some new ideas, something new they tried perhaps. And you might do something like ask them as a group, say a group of 2 or 3, to select 3 or 4 interesting solutions to discuss with the class, but to include at least 1 solution from each person. And this is just another way, really, in this case, building some collaboration and talking through the ideas with each other. So the talk and communication and the critical thinking involved in that is so important for life now and into the future. And we have lesson structures that support this type of approach. And it's important to note, for example, that this sort of lesson structure differs greatly from the lesson structure for a literacy lesson and the way you would plan and enact in a literacy lesson. And this isn't always obvious to teachers. Might be something to really talk through what really is different about planning and enacting a lesson in maths as compared to literacy. So for example, in mathematics, we need to launch the task, provide a hook to really facilitate that engagement, building connections. You know, even it doesn't really matter to me if the previous task was a strawberry or if it was another favourite vegetable or fruit that you might have. So varying it, asking children to select what would be the fruit or vegetable you'd like to explore, that helps to facilitate that engagement. Then there's the phase where after we've launched it, no modelling, we're not telling or showing children what to do, we're just making sure that the task is clarified and that they can get started. We go into the explore phase. And while the children are exploring, the teacher roves, observes, selects and sequences solutions later for the discuss phase of the lesson. And if you want to talk about explicit teaching and learning, this would happen in that discuss phase where there would be a real focus on the key important mathematical ideas. But who would be talking about those and demonstrating those would be the children. And it would be the children talking about their solutions that then the teacher would help to make sense of and build connections where possible to that mathematics focus. So reasoning prompts, the Resolve resource is another one that I really highly recommend to anyone who hasn't explored it or explored it recently. We use these reasoning prompts to really facilitate that critical thinking in mathematics, being able to analyse, generalise and justify your mathematics thinking. And we ask children to actually use these prompts in their discussions with each other. So 6-year-olds love asking, how can we be sure? How do you know? And we know that open tasks are useful for mathematics teaching because of these aspects. And my apologies, I just went through that a little bit too fast. Because they allow students to investigate, make decisions, generalise, seek patterns and connections, communicate, etc. I'll just let you read through that list. And in conclusion, what emerges when we envisage mathematics engagement in primary school through the lens of culture, curiosity, creativity, communication, critical thinking and collaboration? Well, more opportunities to facilitate children's engagement and interest in mathematics. More indicators and evidence that children and families are engaged in mathematics. And that means mathematics learning for all, including ultimately things like VCE completions. And self-determination, whereby young people leaving school in 2030 and beyond, like our current grade 2s, have the full range of choices about their future lives. So thank you for your participation in this session today. I wish you well as you explore these ideas in your particular contexts as we all work together to really facilitate engagement and children's learning of mathematics. I'd like to thank the MAV for the invitation, to Anne for facilitating, and really thank everyone for the great work they're doing. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Anne, for your engaging and also inspirational presentation. I think we've got lots of things to think about and look forward to in the future as we engage all the children and families in mathematics learning. So on behalf of the MAV, I'd like to thank you for your keynote today. And in a moment, we'll take a short break. And Anne, you notice Anne's put some references up there.
And I'm just about, Anne, to put some other links into the chat right now.
Terrific,
So
thank you.
Actually thinking that I'm not seeing the chat function myself. So I might have to put that up on the site.
Yes,
later.
yeah, or you can add them to the end of your presentation.
Yes.
Okay. So thanks again, Anne, and everyone for engaging in Anne's presentation today. So please don't forget to check out the virtual delegate satchel and touch base with our sponsors and exhibitors. Now the next session will start at 10:25.